All right, if you can get her moved over, Celeste, that would be great.
Hi, I got moved over.
Great. I think we're all here. Chuck, Alina will not be joining us today, so I think we're ready to go if you are.
Yep, let's get rolling.
Okay, kick it off, and I'd just like to welcome everyone to the February 25th, 2021 meeting of the Wildlife Conservation Board. To begin, we'll start out with the roll call, establish a quorum, and then we can get into the meeting. So with that, Mr. Chuck Bonham.
I'm here.
Richard Gillian, Department of Finance.
Here.
And before I ask for the roll call for the next member, I'd just like to welcome a new member today, Pete Silva with the Fish and Game Commission, who was selected the new president of the Fish and Game Commission earlier this month. So welcome, Pete. I know you're on, so if we can get a president or a here, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. I'm here and glad to be part of the group. I know I have big shoes to fill with Eric's departure, but I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Board member Pavley.
Here.
Board member Colborn.
Here.
And board member Kreisman.
Here.
And then on the legislative advisory members side, if you could just speak up real quick. So for Senator Borges, Megan D'Souza. Not see her. Catherine Moore for Senator Stern.
Here.
Katarina Robinson for Senator Skinner. Keith Chelino for Assembly Member Garcia.
Here.
And Jim Metropolis for Assembly Member Friedman. I don't know if Jim was going to be able to join us today. So, Mr. Chairman, we do have a quorum.
That's great news. This is me banging the gavel virtually.
Great. So Chuck, before I get into the meeting, how the meeting is going to roll out, you want to make any opening comments? Or just get into it?
Just to remind me, this is for everyone watching, me checking up with John in real time. Did you want me to mention the justice work under your director's report? Or
yeah,
Okay.
Under my
Okay.
director's report.
Perfect. So the only thing I'd say is to welcome everybody. I'm thankful we have a more typical board meeting agenda in front of us compared to the last time we all convened. The board does amazing work around California in close partnership with all of our attendees. And I think it's worth just acknowledging, we're at a moment which is almost one full year of board staff working remotely, and each of us in our own personal lives navigating a global pandemic. So I feel it's always important to just say to each of us as people, I hope you are all doing as safe, are as safe and as healthy as you and your family can be. We're going to make it through this. As the governor recently said, there is a light growing at the end of this tunnel. His leadership is moving California through vaccines and other things. So we're going to survive this. And in the middle of all of it, we have these moments where we can kind of really applaud and kind of showcase what California does on wildlife conservation through this board.
Thank you, Chuck. Okay, so the meeting logistics. So the meeting this morning is being conducted via Zoom, which is a different platform that we've used previously and all through last year, which was Microsoft Teams. Folks should not see any difference. Both platforms are quite similar. And so from the public's perspective, you shouldn't really see any or notice any difference other than the ability to be able to have you noticed if you'd like to speak by the raise hand function. I'll get into that in a few minutes. So for those of you using the telephone system, you can access the presentation that will be presented today via the Wildlife Conservation Board website. So from there, you go to the presentations tab and pull down meetings and then follow along on this particular day's presentation. If you're using the phone system, you will need to press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Also, during public comment period, I would like to ask that you use the raise hand function. That'll help us navigate comments and questions questions from board members if you have any. Also during the public comment, and if you're on the telephone system, you'll need to use *9 to raise and lower your hand. So the format of the meeting will complete the first few agenda items, that there'll be numbers 2 through 6, then proceed to the consent agenda calendar. And then we'll take comments, questions from the board members during that time, and then take any public comments, and then a subsequent motion. I will read the motion into the record, and then we will have a roll call vote by the members. And then after the consent calendar is either moved or discussed, we'll move into the presentations. And the way the presentations will work, I will present the project, just introduce the project, notice any letters of support or opposition, and then introduce staff who will provide an overview of the project. At the end of the presentation, I'll ask for board member comments and/or questions, and then ask for any public comments. However, if any of the board members during the presentation wish to ask a question or have a comment, please speak up, either speak up or raise your hand. For public comments, for any member of the public wishing to make public comments, please state your name and affiliation when at the beginning of your speaking. The order of the public comment will be as follows. Those who fill out a speaker card in advance will be called upon first. And then secondly, those who wishing to speak has not turned in a speaker card, just use the raise hand function and we'll call on you. And then finally, I'll ask if there's any public comment from those using the telephone system. And if there is, you will need to hit *6 and we'll be able to hear you. Similarly to like last board meeting, I would like to ask, and if the board is okay and comfortable holding off on individual motions until the end of all the presentations. If so, we'll have one motion for the consent calendar, which includes items 7 through 31, and another motion for all projects presented, which will include items 32 through 45. We did that all through last year, and it seemed to work pretty well. And if you'll remember, if there's a particular item where the board would like to condition an approval or reject a recommendation, we can take that separately and we'll do a separate and independent roll call vote for that particular project. So with that, I'd just like to ask if there's any questions or comments from board members, or if any board member would like to make any opening comments. All right, seeing none, we'll get into the agenda. So the first item up is item number 2, which is the discussion and selection of the new board chairman and vice chairman. Folks will recall this past year, we adopted a process to elect a chair and vice chair every year on a yearly basis, annual basis. And I'd like to ask if the board could hold off until our April meeting. That's because it will allow all of our board members to be present. Today, our vice chairman is not with us. And so I'd like the opportunity for Alina Folkday to be able to be participating in that process. So if board members are okay, we'll defer this item until the next meeting.
John, this is Chuck. I'm okay with that. And this is a quibble, but in the next agenda, let's just call it chair and vice chair.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from board members? Okay, moving on to item number 3. This is the public forum comment period. So this is to allow the public to make comments to the board on any projects that are not otherwise in the agenda. So if you want to make a comment, but the items on the agenda, please wait for that particular item number to come up. If not, this is the time for you to make comments. So is there any member of the public wishing to make any comments at this time? So Celeste, can you confirm no hands are raised and/or no attendee? Yeah.
There's no comments.
Okay. I see folks are asking about consent items. So seeing no public comment, we'll move into the funding status. Item number 4, this is a running agenda item. This provides the board as well as the public the ability to see WCB's current funding status. And the funding status lists all of the funding that's available to the board for allocation. It reflects all of the funding sources as well as the current balance. It shows board projects and the amounts for those projects summed up that are being discussed today during this meeting. And then it also shows a funding amount for projects currently in development at the staff level. And then it shows an unallocated balance. I'd be happy to answer any questions if the board has any.
Thank you, John. I think it'd be good just to talk through a little bit about what we talked through earlier this week in terms of the chunk that's left in Prop 1 and then the amount that we have left in Prop 68, just the timing in which, and share a little bit with the timing and when you think we'll work through those amounts. And then just also kind of what we talked about in the Prop 1 and getting some projects that really fit that stream flow enhancement.
Okay, so for Prop 1, you'll notice a projected unallocated balance of 61, a little over 61 million. We're currently preparing for the April board meeting, which the board will consider a pretty big agenda package for the expenditure of most of that funding. So any funding that's left over, the 61 million, we'll put out another solicitation later this year, which will include the residual amount that's not allocated during the April meeting, and then an additional $20 million. So we anticipate by the end of next year, we will have Prop 1 pretty much spoken for. So we're anticipating next year or the following year will be our last year for a PSN for Proposition 1. On Prop 68, it's pretty much in the same boat. So we have $72 million aligned. All of the Prop 68 funding has been allocated. We are going back for some reappropriation this year in the budget for some previous dollars that was not spent. And then in my director's report, I'll be going over the specific solicitations under Proposition 68 and the amounts that are associated with that. So, by the end of this year and definitely by the end of next year, the balances for these two propositions should be significantly depleted. So does that work, Mary? And then I'll get into the specific amounts that are going to be available under the different solicitations under Prop 68 in the director's report.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's good for us to be tracking. We need to make sure this work stays funded and be tracking kind of when we'll have high need for more resources and what that looks like. So appreciate that. Thank you, John.
Great, thanks. Any other questions for board members? Okay. Seeing none, okay, we'll move into item number 5. This is the executive director's report. And I do have really 7 items to go over, one of which is going to be a carryover from this is the last item, and discuss our 2021 competitive solicitation process for Proposition 68 and Proposition 1. We'll have 4 solicitations going out over this coming year under Prop 68, which will include the Lower American River Conservancy Program, the Public Access Program, Wildlife Corridor and Fish Passage Program, and the Sierra Nevada and Cascade Program. Under the Lower American, there will be about $2 million that will be available. Under the Public Access Program, there'll be $5 million. The Corridor and Passage Program, 7, and for the Sierra and Cascade, it will be 12. Additionally, we will go out with another stream flow enhancement program solicitation sometime in July, which will be about $20 million. So looking forward to get to those solicitations out the door. And then the other thing that I want to point out, is there any questions on any of those competitive grant solicitations for 2021 board members? Okay, hearing none, seeing none. The next is is our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion that we're currently working with the department on. And I'd really like to ask Chuck to take the lead on this. Chuck has been instrumental in helping us get this off the ground. The department started working on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the early 2019, before the pandemic, before many of the serious actions that brought this more to the light was even brought up. As far as the Wildlife Conservation Board staff, we're engaged in a committee that's made up of staff of the department to really formalize and get this off the ground. And we call it the JEDI program. It stands for Justice, Education, Diversity, and Inclusion. So Chuck, I'll turn it over to you if you'd like to say a few words about that.
I'd be glad to, John.
Thank you.
Give me 1 second. I need to turn the heater off in my office. So here's the top line summary. And this is really in part for board members, Fran, Pete, as also the attendees, the kind of constituency of the Wildlife Conservation Board. I want to thank Pete Silva and the other Fish and Game commissioners who are themselves working on similar activities, and what the commission does very complementary, with what I think most people realize this. While the Wildlife Conservation Board is a separate entity, it's created under state statute, it's also kind of part and parcel of the department. The department kind of envelopes the WCB staff, so there's a high degree of autonomy, but there's also this dynamic of great symmetry and being part of a larger department. So the department is on a journey. It's a journey to create its own justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion actions. And there are a lot of reasons why. About 2 weeks ago, we released for our staff and for the public, you can find it on our website, our first ever justice, equity, action, and inclusion plan. And the development of that has been done by a really diverse set of department employees, senior, junior, regionally diverse, themselves, who all come to this diversity, equity with their own experiences. And that group within our department includes Rebecca Friss and others at WCB. So here's the top line. The fact of the matter is we're all connected in California. We're a population nearing 40 million people in one of the most biodiverse places on earth. It's our natural diversity that makes our natural wealth so amazing. It's the underpinning of the 5th largest economy in the world. But our state is also this place that is so rich in human diversity, whether you look at race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, whatever the attribute may be. We are of the view at the department, at our leadership level, that these things go together. They go hand in hand. They have to fit, hand in glove. Our natural diversity and our people diversity are critical to conservation success in the long run. So when you take a look at this recently released plan, what you'll see are these components. We talk about how we're thinking of the use of words diversity, inclusion, and equity. We really illustrate the benefits of embracing justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which include, I think, quantifiably, statistically, you get better problem solving within your employee kind of base. You get a wider talent pool, bringing people into your enterprise. You produce more innovation. You have better retention and turnover rate within your workforce, and your productivity metrics rise. So these are very well grounded, academic, and kind of be thinking about that relative to your workforce make a difference. But as part of our endeavor, we're also pretty open about this next part. The facts are really simple. They tell a disappointing and powerful story. The department's workforce simply does not reflect California's diversity. There are reasons for that, but it's just not going to work in the long run to stay status quo for us on this front. So we think we've got to be pretty honest, accountable upfront about these facts. So if you took the time to look at this document, what you'll see for several pages are a series of pie charts and statistical kind of demographic characteristics about our workforce using CalHR information as recent as 2018, 2019. As a general matter, this data is laid out visually. It looks at our leadership level. It looks at our middle management. It looks at our rank and file. And my interpretation is, when it comes to gender, the department has done reasonably well trying to improve our gender diversity. But in almost all other attributes, we haven't done well enough. We can do better. So then what you see in our approach is a set of actions we're committing to. Admittedly, a lot of them are internal for now. Here's a set of those actions. We're under a 2-year contract with an organization called Race Forward. It's part of the Capital Collaborative on Racial Equity. By the end of this calendar year, we expect to have a racial equity action plan that is advice from external experts on how to deal with our systemic racism issues within the department. I'll give you an example. Part of this effort is to review all of our historical laws and policies, and you find things like this. Actually, in 1860, one of the state's first License Act regulations was to preclude any Chinese or Mongolian person from fishing in state waters unless they paid a $4 monthly license fee, as opposed to any other group in California. So this is one of the things we're engaged in, completing that contract, producing that racial equity action plan. But there's a lot more. We just announced through this document that we are looking at our job announcement practices. We're adding desirable qualifications to all job announcements, kind of increasing the profile around experiences of cultural sensitivity, cross-team collaboration. So rethinking how we do our job announcements. We're going to be adding a diversity statement to all of our kind of workforce job announcements, social media outreach components. We'll be redacting from a certain set of job aspects, any personal information that can create this kind of implied bias dynamic when you're making hiring decisions. We're changing how we do our interview panels to ensure our interview panels for hiring themselves are diverse. We're rethinking all of our interview questions. This is all, we're not talking about quotas, but we will approach modified, realizing we need to deal with justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. There's a whole category of things around our outreach efforts, our outreach practices, going to high schools, going to historic Black colleges and universities. We actually have brought and created a full-time position within the department that will be expanding how we do our outreach on hiring and recruitment relative to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We've come up with some pretty exciting things we think that are appropriate, but push us. We're announcing a way in which we're putting into our employees kind of duty statements, the ability to do volunteer activities with organizations outside the department consistent with our mission, which will give our employees an ability to go have outside the department experiences and bring that diversity back into our workforce. We're actually in the middle of a humongous training endeavor that includes your WCB staff. We've brought on Dr. Bryant Marks, who's the founder of the National Training Institute on Race and Equity, who served in a lot of advisory roles for President Obama. We've trained almost 500 of our managers and supervisors on implicit bias awareness, which includes a lot of the WCB staff. There's a lot of stuff going on in that space for us. We've got a part of our plan that's around retention and inclusion actions. And then finally, we know that we have a lot of connectivity within the department. So we have this whole arena around what we need to be doing for co-management with our tribal partners. We're very close to figuring out how to have a formal policy where everything the department does in a public space begins with an official land acknowledgement. And we also have this dynamic over to our law enforcement division. Most people know, many may not. We have a 500-person strong, almost wildlife officer corps. They are engaged in their own journey to, rethink how we do business, community policing, de-escalation training, changing use of force policies and techniques. And we're on the brink of beginning procurement for what I think will be the first and certainly the biggest state wildlife officer agency across the nation to go across the board on body cameras and dash cameras for transparency in policing. That's what you'll see if you take the time to look at this Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Action Plan, but it's just the first step in a long journey we know is necessary and much overdue. John, I think that's top to bottom. I hope it didn't take too much time.
No, that was perfect, Chuck. Thank you. I would like to ask, before I ask for board member questions or comments, I'll ask to Rebecca. She would like to just say a few words because she's our designee to the cohort. So she's been engaged from day one in this and really bringing a lot of this work and ideas and implementation back to here at the Wildlife Conservation Board and staff. So Rebecca.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, I joined the cohort early last year as part of the department team, and I am part of the team that's taking the training through the collaborative on race and equity. And I just wanted to mention that that's been a fantastic resource. We're working, across all state agencies to share information across the state on how to best implement new practices and manage some of these issues that have been undealt with for so long. And then I also just want to applaud the leadership of Chuck and Val in the department and really making this a priority for the department and WCB and the Fish and Game Commission. It is work that's long overdue. For me, it's been extremely valuable to be able to take this journey, and now the challenge is to help share the resources and the actions that have already been undertaken, and actually, really make this all more actionable and an everyday part of the department and WCB's doings. I've been super excited actually to see a lot of internal actions already taken within the department. We've made changes to our duty statements. We're providing training to make folks aware of how important it is to have diverse interview panels and to bring in a more diverse workforce. So it's just very enlightening and enheartening to me to be part of the group, and we'll look forward to sharing more information with you guys as we continue the journey. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. So is there any board member comments?
This is Diane. Can I go, or did you?
Please, yeah. No,
Okay. Yeah, I just want to thank both Chuck and Rebecca for that, especially Chuck for that lengthy overview. That was really interesting and encouraging to hear all that. And you kind of partly already answered the question I had, which was just to what extent are those same initiatives being applied to the WCB staff recruitment and hiring and training efforts. And so and if there are additional aspects of it that could be applied that haven't yet, I just encourage you in that direction. But it sounds like a really great process.
Yeah, so that we are supported by the department's
Yeah,
human
Diane-
resources. So all that is available to WCB staff directly.
Okay.
Sorry,
And
Chuck.
then Diane, just.
And Diane,
Go ahead, Chuck.
Diane, my answer is the same as Rebecca's, just using a little bit different language. In this regard, we're all one. I don't see any separation between WCB staff, department staff. We're all one enterprise. And everybody ought to make this change, and everybody ought to be able to use the department's, energy to get it done.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thanks.
John,
Hey.
this Pete, can I just make a quick
Please, Pete.
comment? Yeah, just as Chuck mentioned, we're working together with commission and department staff on the JEDI program, and I just want to acknowledge Chuck's personal involvement. I think it's going to take a lot of work, as Chuck mentioned, but I think it's work that is needed, and hopefully we can get there over the years to come. So, but I just want to mention that my fellow commissioner Samantha Murray and I are taking the lead for the commission on this, and we're trying to. As a matter of fact, we're meeting weekly now with our staff to try to get our plan together. And one aspect of the commission, as you know, is more. We have quite a bit of public engagement, and that's sort of where we want to use that particular tool to establish our plan and work with the department. So we're just very pleased with the effort that's being undertaken. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any more comments, board members?
Yeah, thank you, John, and welcome, Pete. We haven't met in person yet, but welcome to the board. Looking forward to working with you. Thank you so much for this report. Really exciting to hear about this work. I just had a couple of questions. One is, what do you think the biggest barriers are to doing this work? What do you see as kind of, the pieces that will be the toughest to take on?
Great question. I think there are maybe two biggest barriers, and I'm gonna be, my style's pretty direct, and Mary's. I think the first biggest area is what exists within each of us as a person, which is the ability to realize it's okay and healthy to challenge the status quo and ask yourself, in what ways are we not doing well, and in what ways can we do better? All in, the department is an employee base of almost 3,000 people. With our commission, and this includes y'all at the board, we're celebrating our 150th anniversary. And the reality is California today is different than California of 150 years ago. And I think for these wildlife agencies across the state, we're all having an existential struggle, which is, what does our future look like? And who are our constituents? What are our missions? And how do we be sustainable in the long run? And I think for me, sustainability in the long run means we have to be an agency, a department that's responsive to California for all. And that requires us to kind of think about our past, our present, and our future. And it really requires you to kind of realize there's uncomfortable stuff. You need to have the conversation and kind of challenge the status quo, if you will. I think that's a big barrier. I think it's delicate conversation often. I'm a aging white guy who grew up in the South, right? So I come to this topic with my own issues, and you've got to have a space where people can talk about this stuff. And that's, it's hard. So I think that's one barrier. We'll make it through. I think it's a journey. It takes a while. The second barrier, I think, is you try to do that in the space of government structure, and you have to be cognizant of how to make change and improvement respectful of, criteria and standards. As an example, there are things we will do, we've said we're going to do in the HR space. But there are things you can't do. You cannot establish a quota, right? And so going through that is also important. It's responsible. I wouldn't call it a barrier as much as it's a dynamic you have to go engage in. So those are the two that come. And then maybe there's a third, and I think this is true for the Wildlife Conservation Board. I don't advise you ever get to a policy in a sense necessarily, but when we make decisions, I think part of our job is to be informed about the decision. And I don't think yet we ask ourselves when we make a decision, have we thought about whether the rest of California that's not a traditional constituent understands who we are, is involved in our decision, and our decision factors in how it may relate to them. So.
Thank you for sharing that. To follow up on that last point you made, how is outreach around projects? How are you thinking about how outreach around projects and how we shape our programs, right? Just actually integrating into how we do our work functionally.
I think it's a huge growth space for us. I don't have a outcome in my own mind. I do think this board could decide it wants to make that an iterative discussion at the board level and seek advice from our stakeholders. I mean, I think we could go that way with this board. What does it look like for those who know about us and those who don't, for this board to be factoring that in as we're dealing with, deciding how to distribute public funds? I think that's an appropriate area for this board to be thinking about.
Yes, I
Personally.
think so too. Yeah, and we've had some of those conversations, right? When we think about geographic distribution, when we think about stakeholders, outreach, the strategic planning process, and I know we've kind of said we still have work to do here. And I'm kind of curious. The full-time position you mentioned that was hired at the department, is that just focused on recruiting, or is that also focused on outreach?
So, yes, one of the barriers we have, arguably, we aren't advertising who we are as an employer to as a diverse set of individuals as we should be. So to us, that is a strategy to increase the diversity of our workforce. And when I say ours, I include WCB staff. We are also on the brink of being able at the department to post a position which would be very senior, high level, someone who would full-time work on implementing our justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion actions across the whole department. I do think that second position would provide benefit for the WCB, but neither of those are like expressly about how do you do outreach in this space.
Okay. Yeah, it'd be interesting. All of this is about how do we change business as usual, right? And to do things differently, you actually daily have to do things differently. And to your point about kind of constant awareness and change and leaning into discomfort. The process that Rebecca's been participating in and has been at the department, how many staff are going to benefit from that type of work? Because I mean, you articulated well, this is personal work. You can't change an institution unless the individuals in the institution are doing really serious longevity personal work. And so curious what that culture shift and training and support will be for current employees.
Training is incredibly high. We took 500 of our manager, supervisor, executive level through this implicit bias training. We have increased our Office of Training and Development curricula in this space in the last several months. That's available to every employee. And the cohort Rebecca's part of is probably 20 people who are going through the Race Forward, racial equity plan work. I think that this all produces benefit for 3,000 people. And here's the response I I see, Mary. I think there's a set of our workforce whose response is, it's high time, and how can I volunteer? I think there's a set of our workforce which candidly, may say, I don't have much business telling them how to think about these really difficult issues. But I think the vast majority of our workforce is very willing to think about these changes in the department. They just don't yet know how and what and it may actually mean to go through this transformation. So.
And then, and I know I don't want to spend too much time here, but I'm very excited that this is happening. Really, really happy. This is a deep work that is absolutely necessary. There's a huge list that you rattled off in terms of the work that needs to be done. And this, we say internally in my organization, this is forever work. It's not work that has an end date. The process in itself is part of the outcome. But how are you thinking about prioritizing what, in terms of what to take on first and what's most important and where the most immediate opportunities are on some of this internal work?
Yeah, apologies if this comes up wrong. I think the answer is in the document we've made publicly available, which we'll make sure gets circulated to board members, after this meeting. It is publicly available. I think it captures that first tranche of things where we're putting our priority emphasis. And it's only about an 18-page document. I think that's what I would say is our answer on what's like the first set of priorities.
So it was the list of things you rattled off earlier.
Correct.
Okay.
And then by the end of this calendar year, we'll have that second piece, which is kind of the racial equity plan, using these outside experts advising us.
Okay. So the list of things you rattled off earlier, you're hoping to complete by the end of this calendar year.
Well, complete the commitment to do them. I mean, always ensuring your interview process reflects the commitments, it's forever work, right? But the commitment to make the change, yes.
Great. And just maybe at a future conversation, a future board meeting, we could talk a little bit more about, whenever the time is right, John, Chuck, and Rebecca, we could talk a little bit more about how the board can support WCB in integrating these values into the programming as deeply as possible. So would love to kind of support that process when the time is right.
Great. Yeah, we'll definitely update you guys as we go forward. This is a learning process for all of us, I believe, and it's an awareness and it's an implementation journey that we're on. And it's even if you get to a certain milestone, it doesn't stop. You need to keep growing in this arena. And I think it's a great thing for WCB and its staff and the department to go through. So thanks, Mary.
Thank you for taking the time on this. It's very important. Appreciate the time.
Okay. Any other quick questions or comments on that item? Okay, I just got a couple more quick things under the director's report. The schedule, our 2021 schedule for board meetings, that was set back in November, and it's come to our attention. There's a couple conflicts, or there's conflicts with that schedule from a couple of different board members. So we'll be figuring out a new board meeting, a proposed board meeting schedule for the rest of this calendar year. Our April meeting is set. Mary Ahern, I think you all know Mary, she'll be sending out a doodle poll to try to get those meetings scheduled and on our website in the next couple of weeks. And then year-end review, as you know, we put out a year-end review at the end of each year, at the beginning of the new calendar year. We're currently working on that. And hopefully it'll be out in the next 2 to 3 weeks or completed. Just to highlight some of the work that we did back in 2020, we allocated, or you allocated, almost $38 million for restoration and enhancement on about 24,000 acres. We allocated about $62.5 million for purchase of lands and or conservation easements over 47,811 acres of habitat in California. And then spent another 24.4 million on acquisition planning and restoration projects that specifically enhance stream flow. We completed, even during the pandemic, I think it was one of the biggest years for the number of projects completed by staff at WCB. I think we had 93 or 140, I believe, a little over 143 projects in calendar year 2020. So that's just a testament of your staff doing the work that it needs to do. And it was a great year for WCB. A couple more things, just for a reminder, the Form 700, I sent out a letter to all board members beginning of January, reminding you to fill out and submit your Form 700s. There's information in that letter on where to send it and how to send it and how to complete it. And then also just a reminder that your ethics certificate, ethics training needs to be current, and it's considered current every 2 years. So if there's any other questions on those items, be happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll move on to the projects in the agenda. Any questions? All right, so Celeste, if you can move on to the map. So this is a reflection of, this is a map reflecting projects that are currently before the board today. It shows the statewide distribution of those projects. In terms of fee title acquisition, there's 12 of those projects on the agenda today. There's 8 restoration projects, 14 study and planning projects, and then 5 public access projects. The distribution is, we have projects in Northern California. There's quite a few. There's a lot of activity in the central Sierras or Central California section of the state, basically going from the Sierras all the way to the coast, and then down in Southern California along the coast and in inland a ways. So that's a distribution of the map that's for projects that are currently on the agenda today. Any questions on this map or projects? Otherwise, we'll get into item number 6 on the agenda.
Thank you for sharing this, John. Really good for us to be able to see this and continue to monitor how we're doing in terms of geographic kind of equity on things. I know part of it has to do with if we have targeted programs, the funding has to go in targeted regions that may be the focus of those programs. And I know we've had a lot of conversations about how to continue our outreach, our engagement, and our awareness of the resources available for some of the more Southern California communities, inland areas of the state, some of the more rural regions. And I don't know what the right recommendation is, but I think we do tend to get a lot of projects in Northern California around the Bay Area, Sierra. And I think, I think we still have work to do on how do we kind of have those relationships, support communities to be ready. And just would love, and I think this connects very directly with our previous conversation around racial justice and equity. I'd love to think about, we always say you don't improve what you don't measure. And so how do we kind of think about potentially some goals around regional distribution of resources and how appropriate, right, for the programs that are appropriate to be statewide and aren't focused on a particular region. And so I don't know what the right timing to have a conversation around that is. I know we've had some ongoing kind of light touch conversations on this, but I do believe it's pretty important given we know that there is need all over the state, and how do we kind of increase our capacity to reach the state, and what does that look like, and what are our goals around that? So just a pin in whenever John, Chuck, Rebecca, you all think would be the right time to, and whatever you would recommend in terms of how we move towards some goals and measurement around that.
Okay, yeah, we're looking to do that, Mary. And I think we can do it as part of as in November, we presented the strategic plan information and how we're achieving and, in a lot of areas overachieving the goals that we set for ourselves in that plan. And so as part of that process, we could definitely look at the distribution of project funding around the state and how best to incorporate some way to do that equitably, while also meeting the statewide conservation goals. So, we're looking to start, we've began the conversations. We'll be kicking that off in a big way over the next couple months, and we could have another discussion later on this year at a board meeting coming up.
Hey, John, this is Fran, just
Yeah.
adding on with what Mary said. Because we'll be looking at new bonds in the future and things like that. And these kinds of questions always come up on how is money being spent? Is it everywhere? But just statistically, Los Angeles County with 10 million people is 1 out of every 4 Californians. And so WCB's done an amazing job in many areas of the state. And it doesn't always fit with some of our more urban areas, but it's always a challenge, and it's maybe something to just reflect on when future bonds are written, and how to provide some flexibility to address multiple issues.
Great, thanks, Fran. Any other comments?
This is Kara Allen, Program Manager of the WCB's California Riparian Habitat Conservation Program. And I just want to let the board know that we did release a call for concepts recently for the riparian program that does prioritize projects in the Southern California area. So this is one effort in trying to expand the riparians portfolio down in Southern California.
Right, thank you, Kara, for that. All
So
right,
John, I'm mindful of time in the sense that we've got a lot of projects to get through, and I'm mindful of time, and we got a big agenda.
Okay, great, thanks, Chuck. So we'll move on to item number 6 in the agenda. This is a recovery of funds. This is a table that shows the projects that have been closed, finished, completed by staff. It shows the amount of dollars that was allocated for a particular project. It shows the total amount that was expended, and then it shows the balance for recovery. And what recovery means is we will recover those funds into the particular fund source from which they came. So be happy to answer any questions on that. If not, we'll get into the consent calendar. This is, you consider projects 7 through 31 in the agenda. Is there any board member comments on any of the projects? Okay, hearing none, we do have 2 speakers that submitted speaker cards. One, Kara Goger from Mariposa Creek Parkway, item number 20. So Kara Goger. Oh, Kara's internet cut out. Okay, so on
Don, sorry,
yes.
this is Celestial. Can you ask also if you have a speaker to raise their hand just in case we don't see them in the list of attendees?
Yeah, well, please. And
Thank you.
Yeah. So raise your hand if you would like to say something about any of the consent items. All right. Bridget, Fithian?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide public comment on item number 20, which is the Mariposa Creek Parkway Riparian Restoration Project. And I'm Bridget Fithian, Executive Director for Sierra Foothill Conservancy, and we're the local land trust that serves this region and has had the great opportunity to partner with Mariposa County on the planning and development of the expansion of the Mariposa Creek Parkway. And so over the last 2 years, we've been able to acquire the additional lands that will effectively triple the size of the parkway, which comprises the primary riparian corridor running through the town of Mariposa. I wanted to particularly acknowledge Mariposa County's fantastic job building partnerships around this space. And I think you see that reflected in the project and who the project partners are and what the goals of this restoration effort are. And it was great to hear the conversation about the JEDI work that WCB and DFW are undertaking. And I think that this project also supports those goals and efforts in that it partners with our local tribe, the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation. So one of the things that I think is unique about this project is that it does have the goal to integrate traditional ecological knowledge in the design of the project, the implementation of the project, also the goals and outcomes to serve tribal purposes in that space as well. So I want to thank you for considering this, for funding, and tip my hat to Mariposa County for their work in partnership building and in taking on this restoration project. And thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Bridget. On item number 24, Dave Felice.
Yes, sir. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. I'm Dave Felice. I'm manager of the Elkhorn Slough Ecological Reserve. The reserve is unique in the department because we work closely with NOAA as a national estuarine research reserve. Each of the now 30 reserves around the country are different, but each has some version of a state-federal partnership. The arrangement at the Elkhorn Slough is that the state provides the facility and the equipment for the various reserve programs, and we also fund the education program. Your action today demonstrates the state's long-term commitment to this agreement. You funded the construction of the original amphitheater in 1996, and now 25 years and 100,000 people later, you are funding the rebuild of that same facility. Our amphitheater was well used. Most of those 100,000 people were students, some of whom are now middle-aged, infused with the values of our department. We honor our volunteers there annually, had memorials there, an endless parade of gathering events at this special place. The amphitheater is an important tool we use to connect with our visitors and our community. With this action, our outreach will continue well into the future. So thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Dave. Clay River.
Hi, this is Clay River. I am the managing director here for the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation. I'm speaking to item 20 with the restoration to the Mariposa Creek Parkway project. And I just wanted to piggyback kind of what Bridget was talking about our collaboration. Mariposa County and the Sierra Foothill Conservancy have been doing an amazing job in creating a partnership with the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation and restoring the traditional homelands for the Miwok. This project is extremely important in the tribe's fight for federal acknowledgement because the restoration of the parkway is restoring the native plants that are directly tied to our health outcomes and restoration and preservation of cultural pathways. And I believe they have done an amazing job of also addressing equity, bringing the tribe to the table to work in conjunction with each other, and that the project is much bigger than all of us and is a preservation of the Miwok culture. And I just wanted to give public comment today to acknowledge that we are not just written into these proposals, that we are very actively participating and very supportive of these efforts.
Great, thank you, Clay. That was very much appreciated. Mickey Gorling.
Yes, this is Mikey Gorelnik. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf also of agenda item number 20, the Mariposa Creek Parkway restoration. I'm the project manager for Mariposa County for the planning department on this effort. And just to add a slightly different dimension to the comments that Clay River and Richard Fithian have very eloquently added to the conversation. The county and I are not only super grateful for the expertise and talents and passion of our project partners, but also to WCB and your excellent staff in helping us develop and advance this project to the point where it is today. You know, as is certainly the case with other rural communities throughout the state, finding resources to implement these transformative projects is always a really incredible challenge. And for Mariposa County, a rural county that suffers from a range of certainly ecological and cultural, but also economic disadvantages, this program is absolutely essential for us to be able to implement the kinds of changes that our community collectively imagines. So I want to say thank you on behalf of all Mariposans, certainly on behalf of our Board of Supervisors, for your consideration and for this opportunity to advance this, again, truly transformative initiative. So thank you for your time, and thank you for hearing me.
Thank you, Mikey. Okay, I see no other hands raised. Is there any other board member comments on any of the consent items? Okay, seeing none, hearing none, I will read the motion into the record, and then we'll take a roll call vote. So staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board adopt the written findings and approve all the individual projects recommended by staff as suitable for funding up to the amounts listed for each, and listed as consent calendar items 7 through 31 as identified in the Wildlife Conservation Board final meeting agenda dated February 25th, 2021. Authorize staff to enter into appropriate agreements necessary to accomplish these projects, and authorize staff and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to proceed substantially as planned. So is somebody willing to move that?
I would
So
be
John-
glad to move that item. It's Fran Pavley.
Great.
I'll second it. It's Diane.
All right, so we'll take the roll call. So Chuck Bonham,
Yes.
Diane Colborn,
Yes.
Mary Kreisman,
Yes.
Richard Gillian,
Yes.
Fran Pavley,
Yes,
Pete Silva.
Yes.
The motion passes, Mr. Chair. So that brings us on to item number 32 in the agenda. It's our first presentation project of today. And this is to consider a grant to California Trout for a cooperative project with NOAA, construct some public access improvement and nature trails up at Mad River in the estuary. Heather McIntyre on our staff will present the project. Heather.
Thank you, John. Good morning, board members. Before we discuss the Mad River Estuary project, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk with you about the 2020 public access proposal solicitation notice that went out last May. The PSN had 3 priorities: boating access, fishing and hunting access, and non-consumptive wildlife recreation, which is a very broad category. And we found that it brings us a lot of great trail projects. Slide, please. We received a surprising 71 concept applications, and of those, 29 were recommended for full application and 12 will be coming before the board this year. Both the concept and the full applications had a 3-step review process. Each application had an administrative review and a technical review by 3 independent reviewers, and then the decision team reviewed the information from the reviewers and made recommendations on what projects to move forward. Slide, please. This is a map of the projects that are coming before the board this year. Projects have a really good statewide distribution. We have projects in Humboldt County and all the way down into San Diego County. And I'm happy to announce that the Public Access Program will have another solicitation in 2021. And I'm very excited to see what projects will be moving forward next year. So that's all I have on the solicitation. Unless you have any questions, I can get into the Mad River Estuary Project. Are there any questions? All right. Slide, please. This proposal is to consider a grant to California Trout for a cooperative project with NOAA. This project will complete project designs and construct a coastal overlook, an ADA trail, resting sites, and interpretive signs. The Mad River Estuary Public Access Enhancement Project is in Humboldt County within the community of McKinleyville. This project site is within a disadvantaged community. Slide, please. This area is difficult to access for many intrepid nature enthusiasts. Existing informal trails are not accessible to people with mobility impairments. The informal trails fall short of reaching the beautiful coastal estuary views. There is no easy river access due to overgrown vegetation and uneven footing on the large riprap boulders. This project will transform this bluff. Slide, please. This project is part of a larger restoration project that has two primary components: restoration of floodplain habitat and improvements for public access. New trails and a new overlook will provide universal access for a wide range of users and showcase grassland, estuarine, and river views. Trail construction will improve connectivity to regional trails and to the California Coastal Trail. The overlook and trail will provide visitors the opportunity to watch raptors such as white-tailed kites, northern harriers, and peregrine falcons. Improvements for river access will provide people using paddlecraft such as canoes, kayaks, and stand-up paddleboards easier access to the river, and at river level, visitors might see river otters, beaver, and maybe even harbor seals. Slide, please. This project will provide safe, universal access to outdoor recreational opportunities. Specifically, this project will complete design for both the restoration and public access components, construct a 700-foot ADA trail and a new coastal overlook, construct 3 resting sites with benches, install a low post and cable fence, and install 4 interpretive signs with information on the estuary, land use, and Wyandotte culture. Cost share will enhance the project through construction of a parking lot and a gravel trail to a lightly developed water access point. Staff recommends the board approve the project as proposed and authorize staff to proceed substantially as planned. I will be happy to answer any questions the board may have. And Mary Burke, the North Coast Program Coordinator from CalTrout, is in the audience and is also available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. So before we get into comments, I do want to acknowledge for the record that we've received some letters of support for this particular project. One from Senator McGuire, Assembly Member Jim Wood, Steve Madrone, the 5th District Supervisor of Humboldt County, Patrick Kasparsi, Manager of McKinleyville Community Services District, Janet Esdenes, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer with the Blue Lake Rancheria, and Ted Hernandez, the Chairman and the Cultural Director of the Wyandotte Tribe. So with that, we'll be happy to answer any board member questions. All right, seeing none, hearing none. We do have one speaker card filled out from this from Mary Burke, CalTrout. And folks, if I could ask before you start to speak, I know I didn't say this earlier, but if you could try to hold your comments to no more than 2 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you. So Mary.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comment on this project. First, I'd just like to acknowledge the great leadership of the landowner, McKinleyville Community Services District, who is offering this opportunity. And to speak just briefly to also the equity item that was earlier in the board, your agenda today, I want to focus on something that I hope you all will feel really good about. And this project has multiple points of connectivity with the WIAT and is a really important location in the ancestral territory. So through the project development, we've engaged with the WIAT both through the AB 52 and also through development of the interpretive signage. So the interpretive signage, we have one that speaks to the importance of the landscape in general and uses WIAT language with QR codes that allow people to use their cell phone and connect to and listen to WIAT language spoken by a native speaker. And additionally, we're going to develop another sign that speaks to the particular importance of this site to the WIAT and allow them to tell the story in their own terms. So we're really excited about this project, bringing it, making it accessible to the community. The community is right there. The community of McKinleyville can walk to this site, and it will open up access for a wide range of users. So thank you again for your consideration.
Great, thank you, Mary. Any other comments? I see no hands raised. So board's okay, we'll move on to item number 33 in the agenda. Thank you, Heather. So item 33, this is to consider a grant to the National Forest Foundation for a cooperative project with the Forest Service and others to implement a project in Sierra County. James Croft on our staff will present the project. James.
Good morning. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to National Forest Foundation for a cooperative project with the United States Forest Service to complete hazardous fuels reduction within the Ladybug project in the Tahoe National Forest. The project area is directly adjacent to the eastern flank of Stampede Reservoir, 19 miles north of Truckee in Sierra County. Next slide, please. The 2,500 acre Ladybug project area lies adjacent to Stampede Reservoir and surrounds the entirety of the Hoke Valley riparian zone, which includes a lush composition of grasses, willows, aspen, and meadow systems. Stampede Reservoir is particularly integral to this region because it significantly contributes to water flows specifically intended to enhance fishery habitat for the endangered kiwi fish species. The kiwi rely on this water to sustain populations within Pyramid Lake, their last remaining habitat. With the reintroduction of the threatened Lahontan cutthroat trout in Pyramid Lake, Stampede Reservoir also provides benefits to the Lahontan cutthroat trout fishery habitat and overall health of the Pyramid Lake fishery. Next slide, please. Historic logging practices of removing large diameter old growth trees during the 1800s have significantly altered the forest structure from its known pre-European settlement conditions. In the 1960s, the high severity Donner Ridge fire swept through the area and removed large areas of forest. This burn scar was then replanted with densely stocked pine plantations. The project area contains over 500 acres of these densely planted plantations, all of which have been unmanaged since their initial planting nearly 60 years ago. The project will deliver forest thinning, biomass mastication, and prescribed fire treatments over the 2,500 acre project area to reduce wildfire danger. Once thinning treatments are completed, the U.S. Forest Service will reintroduce fire by initiating prescribed fires during optimum conditions, providing additional forest health benefits to the project area. Next slide, please. Within the Hoke Valley project area, fire suppression has led to rapid conifer encroachment in the sensitive riparian zone and disruption of hydrological function of the area. This has resulted in a forest system that is now highly vulnerable to high severity wildfire. Additional thinning and mastication treatments within the riparian and meadow areas will protect 65 acres of aspen and reduce conifer encroachment within 100 acres of mountain meadow habitat. Next slide, please. Old and unmaintained Forest Service logging roads within the project area are increasing sediment transport to the reservoir and negatively impacting water quality within the surrounding area. Secured matching federal funds will be used to implement 9.5 miles of road reconstruction to alleviate these issues. This project will create a resilient ecosystem on a landscape scale and result in additional tangible benefits, including improved wildlife habitat, protected upland water quality, and preserved carbon storage. Next slide, please. Staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. On the call today to answer any questions you may have is Mr. Evan Ritzinger, California Program Coordinator, Tahoe area from National Forest Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Any board member comments or questions? Okay, I see no hands raised. Any public comment? We have no speaker cards for this one. Hearing none, seeing none. All right, we'll move on to item number, thank you, James. We'll move on to item number 34, I'm sorry. 34, this is to consider the Truckee Springs project in Nevada County. This is to consider a grant to the Truckee Donner Land Trust. Brian Gibson on our staff will present the project. Brian?
Thank you, John. Truckee Springs is an approximately 25-acre property located in downtown Truckee. The property is bounded by the Truckee River to the northwest, developed residential properties to the northeast and the east, undeveloped sloping terrain to the southeast, and California Department of Fish and Wildlife's 41-acre West River unit of the Truckee River Wildlife Area to the southwest. The property consists of 3 contiguous parcels of undeveloped land in an east-west orientation, with its northern perimeter providing approximately 2,000 feet of frontage along the south side of the Truckee River. The highest and best use for the property is for residential development on approximately 4.2 acres, which is enhanced by the virtue of its riverfront and private open space. Next slide. The property, in combination with adjacent protected open spaces, preserves roughly 1 mile of riparian habitat along the Truckee River. A year-round spring flows across the property, providing a corridor of riparian habitat linking the forest with the river. Next slide, please. Acquisition of the property fits into 2 of Truckee Donner Land Trust conservation plans to protect and provide access to the Truckee River between Truckee and the Nevada state line, and to provide open spaces and public access points adjacent to Truckee's neighborhoods. Next slide. The majority of the property has gently rolling terrain and is mostly covered in dense sagebrush and other forms of natural vegetation. Tree cover overall is sparse, with dense conifer groves along portions of the southern and eastern boundary. A large aspen grove and a grove of mature cottonwood trees surround the spring. Several large bears are seen roaming the property regularly, as are deer, coyote, and numerous other mammals common to the area. Raptors, including red-tailed hawks and bald eagles, frequent the area, and waterfowl nest in the riparian areas. Rainbow, brown, and Lahontan cutthroat trout can be found in the adjacent Truckee River. In 2015, Truckee adopted the updated Truckee Trails and Bikeways Master Plan. The plan identifies Truckee River Legacy Trail as a high priority. The trail forms the backbone of Truckee's alternative transportation system. The property is slated to support the trail extension, which will cross the property and connect with the wildlife area to the west. Next slide. An important part of the public access plan for the property is the construction of a new pedestrian bridge across the Truckee River. Funding has been secured for the construction of the bridge, which is slated to begin next year. Next slide. Truckee Donner Land Trust plans to improve the existing trail system by adding new trails, a dedicated trailhead, and signage, both directional and interpretive. Addition of the improvements will begin soon after the property is acquired. The property will be open to the public with vehicular access at the trailhead. Next slide. Staff recommends the WCB approve the project as proposed, authorize staff to enter into the appropriate agreements necessary to accomplish this project. And in the audience is John Savan. He's the co-executive director of Truckee Donner Land Trust, and Hardy Bullock, Nevada County Supervisor of the 5th District. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brian. So for the record, we have received 3 letters of support for the project, one from Hardy Bullock, Supervisor, Nevada County, Anna Wolfstad, Mayor, Town of Truckee, John Savan, at the Truckee Donner Land Trust. Is there any board member comments and or questions for this project? Right, seeing none. Any public speakers? I see no hands raised.
There are a couple hands raised now, John.
Yes.
Oh, I raised my hand. Let me look. So Hardy Bullock?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, please go.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Donnelly and honorable board members for taking the time to consider this important project for our community. The Truckee Donner Land Trust has been a partner to our Region 5 here for many, many years, done a lot of great work to protect the open space. This project is a little bit unique because it is directly adjacent to downtown. And if you visited Truckee or the Tahoe region lately, you'll understand that we're under immense pressure to support the outdoor recreation economy and all the new visitors we have here based on the fact that we're a great place to visit and also the COVID pandemic. So we're trying to cross this bridge together as a community and use open space to create capacity for people visiting here safely in a respectful manner with conservation values in mind. So I just wanted to let everybody know that that's why I'm in support of this project. We have a changing visitor demographic, and it's coming from the urban areas that surround the Truckee Tahoe area. And we really want to welcome these visitors while protecting and enhancing the place that we live and love from a conservation value perspective. This property in particular, the 25 acres that's been mentioned, there's immense benefits, conservation benefits, protecting wildlife habitat and wildlife corridors, adjacent directly to the river, water quality, watershed protection. The recreation and access is something I wanted to mention. This is really serving a demographic that may not be headed out to the farthest reaches of our region and the backcountry experience and hitting trailheads and stuff. It may offer a way for everybody to connect equally to the place that we love and we share and we value here because it's so close to downtown. There's access and parking, and it doesn't take a super adventurous soul to find this property, but it is, as noted in the report, the wild side of downtown. There's economic revitalization as it links to downtown, which is our main economic corridor that supports the Truckee area. And then there's also some historic preservation value based on the fact that this is ancestral Washoe tribal property. And so for that, we thank your consideration. We really appreciate your consideration of this project, and I'd urge you to support this. And very respectful of your time today. Thank you.
Great, thank you. John Savon, I believe that's your hand.
That's me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, members of the board and Chairman Donnelly. My name is John Spahn. I'm the co-executive director of the Truckee Donner Land Trust. And I would largely echo what Hardy said, what Supervisor Bullock said. But I would like to add that we've worked on several great projects with the wildlife in partnership with the Wildlife Conservation Board. And as Hardy mentioned, this one's unique in that it's right downtown as opposed to, off the beaten path a little more. And I would also like to add that we're excited that it provides access over to that Department of Fish and Wildlife Truckee River Wildlife Area Unit. And lastly, I'd like to thank staff for all their hard work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, seeing no more hands raised. Any more board member comments? All right, seeing none or hearing none, moving on to item number 35, the Laguna Wildlife Area Expansion number 9 project in Sonoma County. This is to consider the acquisition of 47 acres of land by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Jason Yee on our staff will present the project to you. Jason?
Thanks, John, and good morning, board members. This project is to consider the approval for CDFW to acquire a 47-acre property known as Ambrosini Ranch. As highlighted in red on the map, the property is located in western Sonoma County, just 1 mile north of the city limits of Sebastopol and 7 miles west of Santa Rosa. Highway 116 is less than 1 mile west of the property and provides frontage road access via Occidental Road, which runs along its southern boundary. The property is in an area known as Laguna and is entirely situated within the Laguna de Santa Rosa floodplain. The property is identified as a high priority for protection in the CDFW Laguna de Santa Rosa Conceptual Area Protection Plan. The plan has identified properties for acquisition that contain core wetland habitats of the Laguna de Santa Rosa floodplain area. property consists of 3 parcels that includes a rectangular main tract of 46 acres and a 1 acre detached parcel just northwest of the main tract. The topography of the property is mostly level to gently sloping with habitat characterized by annual grasslands, seasonal wetlands, and riparian vegetation. For the past 15 years, an 8-acre southern portion of the property has been leased for the production of organic blueberries. The blueberry operation will be removed and cleaned up before the transfer of the property to CDFW. Next slide, please. The property's eastern and northern boundaries abut a portion of the Laguna de Santa Rosa, a seasonal tributary and wetlands complex that is a component of the CDFW Laguna Wildlife Area, first established by the Fish and Game Commission in 1993. CDFW, with the support of WCB, initiated the foundation of the wildlife area with the first acquisition in 1980 of a 75-acre parcel to protect seasonal vernal pools, valley oaks, and endangered species. To date, WCB has authorized acquisition of 539 acres for the wildlife area, helping to create the second largest freshwater wetland complex in Northern California that offers recreation in the form of wildlife viewing, fishing, and hunting. Next slide, please. The wetland habitats of the wildlife area contain or support migratory waterfowl and a number of rare or endangered species. These include, among others, the western yellow-billed cuckoo, peregrine falcon, bald eagle, California freshwater shrimp, and the California tiger salamander. State-listed rare, threatened, or endangered plant species include the white sedge, Burke Schofields, Sebastopol meadowfoam, and many-flowered Naboritia. Next slide, please. The habitats of Laguna area have been severely impacted by historic and ongoing livestock grazing, agriculture, irrigation, and development. This proposed acquisition supports the expansion of the Laguna Wildlife Area, creating more public recreation opportunities, and will permanently protect core wetlands and riparian habitat for rare and endangered animal and plant species. Also, CDFW does not currently have access to the wildlife area through lands that it currently controls. This acquisition can provide CDFW with direct vehicle and equipment access to the interior of the wildlife area, promoting efficient management and restoration of the habitat, and would also allow CDFW to establish a regulated access point for the public, which it currently lacks. The property will be managed according to the existing management plan established by CDFW region staff. Next slide, please. DGS has approved the appraised fair market value of $1,300,000. Staff recommends the board approve this project as proposed. In the audience is Brian Shelton of CDFW Region 3, a biologist. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Jason. Any board member comments or questions? Right, seeing none. Any public comments? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Jason. Move on to number 36, the King Fire Forest Restoration Project in El Dorado and Placer counties. This is to consider a grant to the American Forests for a cooperative project with Forest Service, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and others for a fuels reduction project, restoration project up in this year. As Judah Grossman on our staff will present the project. Judah?
Yeah, thank you, John, and members of the board. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to American Forests for a cooperative project with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy and U.S. Forest Service to enhance a combination of mixed conifer forest and meadow habitat on 2,046 acres in El Dorado National Forest, roughly 6 miles west of the town of Forest Hill in El Dorado and Placer counties. This map slide shows the project area in red relative to the town of Colfax to the west and Lake Tahoe to the east. Next slide, please. This project helps address impacts from the King Fire, which burned over 97,000 acres in 2014. The following video is less than 2 minutes long, but it provides helpful background for the proposed post-fire recovery project. Celeste, if you would.
The King Fire started on September 13th, 2014, outside Pollock Pines, California. After 3 days, the fire exploded, upending what we thought we knew about fire behavior. In just 1 day, it burned more than 50,000 acres. Nearly a month later, on October 10th, the King Fire was finally contained, but not before consuming 97,717 acres, almost half of which burned at such high severity that all that remained were the dead sentinels of a forest that once was. 5 years later, the forest remains much as it was immediately following the fire. A dense mixed conifer forest transformed into shrubs, grasses, and forbs. In a healthy forest, fire is a natural creator of new life, the perfect means to reduce competition, clear forest floors of downed fuels, and return vital nutrients to the soil. In an unhealthy forest, stressed by decades of fire suppression and a warming climate, it instead can be a destroyer. Fires like these can be prevented. These forests can be saved. This fire offers a warning to the future. Will we listen? Will we learn?
Great. Thank you, Celeste. I think that video provided some helpful imagery to help visualize the type and scale of projects that we're talking about now. So if you would advance to the next slide, please. This map shows the King Fire boundary as a black outline with the project area shown as red polygons. The majority of the project is comprised of climate-smart reforestation across 2,000 acres in the King Fire burn scar. The smaller polygon to the east is a 46-acre meadow above the King Fire burn scar, where encroaching conifers will be thinned to enhance meadow habitat and remnant aspen stands. Next slide, please. This photograph showing shrub regrowth in the King Fire burn scar offers an example where conifer seedlings will be planted to help restore mixed conifer forest. Next slide. And this photograph shows Francis Cow Camp Meadow, where encroaching conifers will be thinned to enhance meadow habitat and aspen stands that remain there. Next slide. Staff recommends the project as proposed. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And on the call today, we also have Brittany Dyer, California State Director with American Forests, and Dana Walsh, silviculturist with El Dorado National Forest. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Judah. So for this project, and for the record, we have received letters of support from Elizabeth Berger, the Acting Forest Supervisor, U.S. Forest Service of the El Dorado National Forest, Angela Avery, Executive Officer of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, Andrew Fecco, General Manager of Placer County Water Agency, Mark Egbert, District Manager, El Dorado and Georgetown Divide Resource Conservation Districts, Kevin Zeman, Stewardship Director of the Mule Deer Foundation, and Kevin Bella, Pacific Coast District Biologist with the National Wild Turkey Federation. So with that, is there any board member comments or questions?
John?
Yes, please go.
Just for point of clarification, this, and I support the project, that's no issue at all. And I get the impact of fires that go on Forest Service lands to the surrounding communities. And it's tragedy and it's ongoing and increasing. But my question is this is coming from Prop $68 and it's going to the U.S. Forest Service, which is fine, but it's state money going to the federal government. Are there a lot of ongoing reciprocal relationships around the state that I may just not be aware of? I know in the Santa Monica's, the National Recreation Area, the NPS works collaboratively with the Conservancy. So I was just curious if funding flows back and forth on whoever is spearheading the project.
Yeah, this particular grant is going to the American Forests. They're a nonprofit organization, so it's not going directly to the federal government.
Okay.
It's to do work on the federal government's property, so which is public lands.
Are there are there some projects that do go directly to the federal government, U.S. Fish and Wildlife or whatever?
Yes, we have had projects where we made grants to either the Forest Service to acquire properties or enhance properties. It's typically a third-party transaction where we make a grant to a nonprofit, and they contract with the Forest Service or the federal government to do work on their lands. Particularly Proposition 68, the federal government is a qualified entity to receive funding under Prop 68. So, had this grant been directed and gone to or proposed to be going to the federal government, we would have been within the guidelines of the proposition. So we have made grants to the National Park Service in the past, Fish and Wildlife Service, federal government or Forest Service.
I do remember some up at Tuolumne Meadows and others. I was just, I'd appreciate that it was written into the initiative. That's a good clarification for me. I just wondered if it was ever the federal government assisting on state-owned properties, maybe not directly grants to the state, but to an organization or a foundation on state land.
Off the top of my head, Fran, I don't know this. The federal government participate in a lot of the projects that we do on state land through, coordination, scientific review, those kinds of things. So they do reciprocate. I don't know, the federal government provides a lot of funding for endangered species habitat through their Section 6 program in Southern California and throughout the state. So we do receive federal funding for state projects, particularly as they relate to NCCPs and HCP lands. So feds do provide funding to the state as well.
Okay.
And oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes the board, the department, we subgrant the federal funds to a nonprofit organization or to a county or to a city. But then other times the department will maintain ownership where those federal funds were used. So it is kind of not necessarily a quid pro quo, but we do provide funding to them and they provide funding to us.
Very good. I appreciate that. We try to cooperate back and forth in the Santa Monica Mountains, depending upon who has money and availability and who has the expertise on an issue. And we rely on the National Park Service here as for their biologists a lot. So thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you, Fran. So any other board member comments? Questions? All right, any members of the public wishing to speak? I don't see any hands raised. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 37. This is the Yosemite Area Forest Restoration Phase 2 project. This is located in Mariposa County, and it's considered a grant to the Mariposa County Resource Conservation District for a cooperative project. Judah will also provide the presentation on this project as well.
Yeah, thank you, John. I appreciate that. As John said, this proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Mariposa County Resource Conservation District for a cooperative project with the California Office of Emergency Services, University of California, Berkeley, Yosemite Conservancy, National Park Service, and U.S. Forest Service to enhance forest health and reduce hazardous fuels through selective thinning on approximately 2,153 acres of mixed conifer forest in Yosemite National Park and the Yosemite West community, roughly 5 miles west of the town of El Portal in Mariposa County. This location map shows the project area in red, and you can see the various landmarks, including the town of Mariposa to the southwest. The project area appears as a long sinuous line because it involves thinning small diameter conifers and dead trees along major road corridors. Next slide, please. As indicated by the Phase 2 qualifier and the project title, WCB previously funded similar work in this vicinity through a grant approved by the Wildlife Conservation Board at its meeting in February 2020. Next slide. This proposed project is a continuation of that forest health work, removing hazardous fuels to reduce risk of catastrophic wildfire and help protect local communities and wildlife habitat, including stands of giant sequoias. Drought-driven tree mortality and a history of fire suppression have resulted in dramatically high fuel loads that pose a real threat to this region. Giant sequoias are a striking indicator of forest health in this ecosystem because they are so long-lived and famously resilient. Some giant sequoias have survived up to 3,000 years. However, an alarming rate of giant sequoia mortality has been documented over just the last few years. For example, in 2017, the railroad fire burned the fuel-loaded Nelder Grove of giant sequoias in Sierra National Forest, killing 39 of 103 adult giant sequoias in that grove alone. Also in 2017, the Pier Fire burned the fuel-loaded Black Mountain Grove in Giant Sequoia National Monument and Thule Indian Reservation, where 53 of the 500 adult giant sequoias subsequently died. Next slide. There are other recent observations of giant sequoia mortality, but the message is clear. These giant green sentinels are vulnerable too, and this project will take steps to help protect them and the ecological function of the nearby forests. Next slide. This proposed project would thin small diameter conifers and dead trees along major road corridors connecting the western edge of Yosemite National Park. It would also benefit long-term management of these forests by supporting prescribed fire in the adjacent areas. Next slide. Staff recommends the project as proposed. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board might have. And on the call today, we also have Melinda Barrett, Program Manager with Mariposa County Resource Conservation District, and Garrett Dickman, biologist with Yosemite National Park. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Judah. For the record, we have received letters of support from Kevin Can, Chair, Mariposa County Board of Supervisors, Rick Kuiper, Chief, Sierra Cascade Division of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Dr. Rebecca Green, U.S. Forest Service, Pacific Southwest Research Station, and Dr. Jody Tucker, U.S. Forest Service. Also Pamela Flick, the California Program Director of Defenders of Wildlife. John Buckley, Executive Director of the Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center. And Dr. Christine Scheib, Director of Science with Save the Redwoods League. Is there any board member comments? Questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, is there any public member wishing to speak or ask a question? Remember, if you want to speak, please raise your hand and we can call on you. So seeing no hands raised. Thank you, Judah. We'll move on to item number 38 in the agenda. This is the Butano Creek Channel Stabilization and Habitat Enhancement Project in San Mateo County. It's to consider a grant to the San Mateo Resource Conservation District for a cooperative project with several other groups. And Don Crocker on our staff will present the project. Don?
Thank you, John. Two of the next three projects to be presented are the first projects from the 2020 Wildlife Corridor and Fish Passage solicitation to be brought to the board. So before we discuss Butano Creek, I'd like to give you an update on the response we've received to last year's solicitation. Next slide, please. Proposition 68 allocated $30 million to the WCB for projects to construct, repair, modify, or remove transportation infrastructure or water resources infrastructure to improve passage for fish or wildlife. 2020 was the second wildlife corridor and fish passage solicitation we've done. The first in 2019 awarded 11 projects close to $13 million. Like 2 years ago, last year's solicitation sought 4 types of projects: wildlife corridor planning and implementation and fish passage planning and implementation. The PSN was released on May 18, 2020, and the first steps for applicants was to submit a pre-application concept paper by June 11. WCB staff reviewed those pre-apps and selected a subset to submit a full application by August 7th, with the final selection happening on September 23rd. Next slide, please. We received 43 pre-apps totaling close to $34 million. As you can see from the map on the right, the projects are well distributed north to south across the state, but are concentrated on the western side of the state closer to the coast and large urban centers.
There was roughly an equal number of projects submitted for each category, but the amount requested was significantly higher for fish passage implementation projects. This difference has been inflated by a single $8 million project that was ultimately not selected to submit a full application. But even without this outlier, fish passage projects are on average more expensive than the wildlife corridor applications we've been receiving. Next slide, please. From those 43 pre-apps, we requested 21 full apps. Sorry, the slide is wrong. We requested 21 full applications totaling close to $16 million. Again, looking to the map on the right, the north-south distribution is fairly even in terms, but there's still a concentration of the projects on the western side of the state. In terms of the categories of the project, there was a steep drop in the number of fish passage planning projects. This is the primary result of there being much more shovel-ready fish passage implementation projects. And whereas with the wildlife corridor, there's been less development of the planning, so we thought it was important to include more planning projects. Next slide, please. From the 21 full applications, 10 projects totaling more than $8 million were selected. Looking at the map again, you can see most of the projects selected are in the Bay Area and South Coast region. In 2019, there were a similar number of projects in Southern California, but in that year, there were 4 North Coast projects and 2 Bay Area projects. In 2020, those numbers flipped, and there are 4 Bay Area projects and 2 North Coast projects this year. Looking at the numbers by project category, we would have liked more wildlife corridor implementation projects, but we can only find 2 that met Prop 68's requirements and were ready to go into the field in a reasonable time frame. There were a couple of other wildlife corridor implementation projects that were interesting potential projects, but not far enough along in their planning process to be ready for implementation funding. Hopefully, we'll see those projects again in this year's solicitation. Which brings me to my final point. The 2021 solicitation will be released in June, during which we hope to expend all the remaining wildlife corridor and fish passage funds from Prop 68. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about the solicitation. Okay.
I see no hands raised, so please continue.
Okay. Next slide, please, Celestial. So the first project from the 2021 solicitation is the Butano Creek project. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the San Mateo Resource Conservation District for a cooperative project with San Mateo County, the Peninsula Open Space Trust, and a private landowner to address channel incision at Cloverdale Bridge, pier scour, bank instability, while providing habitat enhancement benefits for salmonids and other aquatic species in Butano Creek, 1 mile west of the town of Pescadero in San Mateo County. Butano Creek is a perennial stream on the western side of the Santa Cruz Mountains and is the largest tributary to Pescadero Creek. Historically, the Butano Creek watershed supported robust runs of steelhead and coho salmon, but these species have experienced substantial declines over the past century. This has been due to long-term impacts to Butano Creek from agriculture, timber harvesting, and rerouting of the creek channel, which have resulted in major changes to channel characteristics and reduced anadromous fish habitat. The 2012 final California Central Coast Coho Recovery Plan referred to the coho salmon population in the watershed as nearly extirpated. However, adult coho have been observed in the watershed at a few locations over the past few years, and the headwaters of Butano Creek still contains high-quality habitat for both coho and steelhead. Coho salmon in the watershed belong to the Central California Coast Evolutionary Significant Unit, which is listed as endangered under both the federal and state Endangered Species Acts. The watershed also supports a Central California Coast steelhead distinct population segment, which is also a listed species. The restoration of fish passage on Butano Creek is an important step to restoring the population of these species because it is one of 2 priority watersheds for coho recovery in San Mateo County, and the project site is designated as critical habitat for the Central Coast steelhead. Next slide, please. The fish passage barrier occurs where Cloverdale Road crosses Butano Creek. The bridge, which you can see in the picture here, was constructed in 1963 and realigned a 120-foot section of Butano Creek, cutting it off from its floodplain. In effect, this narrowed the creek channel and increased water velocity moving under the bridge. This increase in velocity accelerated erosion of the creek bed and caused up to 11 feet of incision at the bridge site. Compounding the problem in sort of a positive feedback loop, this incision has increased the stream gradient and further increased water velocity. This has further accelerated the channel incision, increased downstream sedimentation, and exacerbated bank failure. Because of this, the bridge is designated as scour critical by Caltrans, which is their highest level of concern. Next slide, please. This change in hydrology has also caused significant changes to the stream channel. In the top picture, you can see how the creek is cutting into the base of the bridge's foundation, and the bottom picture is an area that recently suffered from a bank failure. There's also been a reduction in the amount of gravel bars, riffles, and side channels, and the channel is now isolated from its floodplain, and there has been a substantial reduction in the amount of large woody debris in the channel. Without these elements, anadromous fish are not able to pass beyond the bridge during periods of high water flow and access upstream spawning habitat. The increased erosion at the site has also contributed to a 10-fold increase in the historical sedimentation rate in the Pescadero Lagoon and Marsh that has reduced habitat quality in this important estuary. Next slide, please. In an effort to reverse these trends, this project will improve fish passage for anadromous fish, increase connectivity between the channel and floodplain, and enhance aquatic habitat for the California red leg frog. It will do this by raising the channel bed with engineered stream bed material along a 625-foot reach of Utano Creek. This will reduce the stream gradient and slow down water moving on the bridge. The new stream bed will also contain 4 50-foot long habitat enhancement pools and newly installed large woody debris, which will provide the salmonids enough low flow refuge to successfully pass upstream. Erosion will be further reduced by planting willow trees along the banks to provide additional channel stability and by the repair of the bank failure I showed you on the previous slide. Next slide, please. And so this is an overview of the project site. The areas in yellow are where the engineered stream bed material will be placed to raise the channel bed. The habitat pools are the blue areas. The green areas are where the willow trees will be planted. And if you look close enough, you can see where the large woody debris will be placed. Next slide, please. When this project is completed, there will be improved spawning habitat within the 625-foot linear feet of the project reach. More importantly, though, is now Coho and Steelhead will have access to at least 3 miles of suitable spawning habitat upstream of the bridge. Some of the other benefits of the project include increased habitat complexity that will be a benefit for multiple life stages of anadromous fish species, an improvement in riparian habitat that will benefit sensitive species like the California red-legged frog, and a reduction in fine sediment delivered to the Pescadero Lagoon. Therefore, staff recommends the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience is Jared Fisher from the San Mateo Resource Conservation District. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any board member comments or questions? All right. Hearing none, any public member wishing to speak on this project? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 39 in the agenda, the Highway 17 crossing planning and design project in the city or the county of Santa Clara. This is to consider a grant to Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District for a cooperative project with Caltrans, Fish and Wildlife, and others for a wildlife crossing on Highway 17. Don will also present this project.
Thanks, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District for a cooperative project with the California Department of Transportation to develop the designs and environmental documentation for a wildlife undercrossing and regional trail overcrossing of Highway 17, 6 miles south of Los Gatos in Santa Clara County. Before I go into the details of this project, it's a little confusing because this is a project that deals with wildlife mobility, but it was not part of the Prop 68 solicitation. It was funded by a different source. I just wanted to clarify that. Next slide, please. Lexington Reservoir is located in the Santa Cruz Mountains between Los Gatos and Santa Cruz. The areas surrounding it are primarily open space reserves, county parks, and water utility lands. The lack of development has left the habitat relatively intact, and the area is rich in biodiversity and home to several listed species. The glaring exception is Highway 17, which can be seen in this picture following the shoreline of the reservoir. The highway is 4 lanes wide and serves as the main connection between the South Bay and beaches of Santa Cruz County. This has resulted in a wildlife roadkill hotspot and vehicle safety hazard while creating a gap in the regional trail system that limits recreational potential. In fact, the impacts of the road on wildlife are severe enough that the project is included on the 2020 CDFW Wildlife Movement Barrier Priority List. Next slide, please. One of the main reasons the area is on the priority list is due to the impact Highway 17 has had on mountain lions in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The road has reduced habitat connectivity and contributed to the poor genetic diversity of the small population of adult mountain lions there. Due to these factors, the California Fish and Game Commission is considering a petition to list the evolutionary significant unit that Santa Cruz mountain lions are in as a threatened or endangered species under the California Endangered Species Act. And it's not just the mountain lions, there are other listed species or otherwise sensitive species in the project area that have been negatively impacted by decreased habitat connectivity. Next slide, please. Human movement has also been blocked by this barrier. Highway 17 causes a regional trail gap that prevents the 50 miles of the Bay Area Ridge Trail from being connected to the 22 miles of the Juan Bautista de Ganza National Historic Trail. And the road also blocks 14 miles of north-south trails that parallel the highway from connecting to other regional trail systems. These local and trails include the Los Gatos Creek Trail, a planned connection to the Guadalupe River Trail and Bay Trail in San Jose, and the planned trail system for the Bear Creek Redwoods Open Space Preserve. Next slide, please. This grant will address these connectivity issues by funding the development of planning designs and environmental review for a wildlife undercrossing with up to 5.4 miles of directional fencing and a recreational trails overcrossing. Specifically, this planning project will develop close to 20 environmental and technical studies and reports. Engineering designs at the preliminary 35%, 65%, 95%, and 100% design levels will be delivered. A CEQA initial study with proposed mitigated negative declaration and a NEPA categorical exclusion will be completed. Permitting work will also be done during this period, but it'll be funded by the project's cost share and not use WCB funds. When this effort is complete, all the steps necessary to begin actual implementation of the designs will have been completed. Next slide, please. This project will lay the foundation for the facilitation of wildlife movement between approximately 30,000 acres of protected critical habitat area and the reduction of wildlife mortality due to vehicle collision. This will benefit not just mountain lions, but other listed species like the four pictured here that have been impacted by the barrier caused by Highway 17. Recreational opportunities will also be improved by a trail overcrossing that will connect public open space and parklands on either side of Highway 17 and bridge a substantial regional trail gap. Therefore, staff recommends the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience is Meredith Manning and Julie Anderson from the Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Don. Any board member questions, comments?
A quick question, please. Just as I try to follow funding sources all around the state. The $5 million comes from the general fund.
Correct.
Can you explain that? I heard the presentation on it. It didn't qualify for Prop 68. I don't, I guess.
Well, it would have qualified, but this other funding source came in. I think John might be in a better position to talk about why we had that money available from the general fund for this.
There was
That's what my question is.
Yeah, there was a budget act, I believe 3 years ago, that allocated $10 million of general fund money to WCB for projects that were worked on by Mid-Peninsula Open Space District. It was very specific to the San Jose Water Company lands that are adjacent to the particular project that was presented to you today. That the budget language was amended last year or in this current budget year to allow that to extend and reappropriate that $10 million of general fund money, but then also it was reappropriated for the purpose of acquisition, planning, design, development, public access, rehabilitation, restoration, protection, and expansion of wildlife corridors and open space, including projects to improve connectivity, reduce barriers between habitat areas in the upper Guadalupe, Los Gatos Creek, Saratoga Creek, and areas adjacent to the San Jose Water Company land. So this was a direct budget allocation in the governor's budget to WCB for this kind of a project in this specific area.
And so this was a couple of years ago through the budget process where a line item in the budget was for 10 million to the WCB. Is that
exactly? Right.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions from board members? I do, for the record, want to point out that we received several letters of support for this. One from Senator Jim Bell, 15th Senate District. Also a letter of support from several other legislative members, including Senators Dave Cortese, Senator Laird, and Senator Wykowski. And then on the Assembly side, from Ash Carla, Alex Lee, and Mark Berman, and Robert Rivas. We also received a letter of support from Bart Broom, Director of State Government Relations, Valley Water, Don Rocha, Director, County of Santa Clara Parks and Recreation Department, Sarah Cardona, Director of Climate Control and Advocacy with Greenbelt Alliance, Alice Kaufman, Legislative Advisory Director with Green Foothills, Carol Lacey, Director, Connected Lands with the Nature Conservancy, Tanya Diamond, co-principal for Pathways for Wildlife, and Walter Moore, President of Peninsula Open Space Trust. So is there any other board member comments or questions? Seeing none, is there any public members who wish to speak on this project? Right, seeing none. All right, we'll move on. And just a quick time check, we've reached the noon hour now, and we have, I think, 6 more projects. So just be mindful of time. We are scheduled to go to 1 o'clock. So with that, we'll move into item number 40, which is the State Route 152 Pacheco Pass, Pacheco Creek Wildlife Connectivity and Corridor Enhancement Project. Don will also present this project. Don?
Thanks, John. This proposal is to consider the allocation for a grant to the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency to restore habitat and alter transportation infrastructure to improve the ability for wildlife to safely cross State Route 152 and to improve highway safety for drivers by minimizing vehicle collisions with wildlife near Pacheco Creek and the Pacheco Pass area of Santa Clara County. And just for clarification, this is the second project that came from the Prop 68 2020 corridor solicitation. Slide, please. The Diablo Mountain Range begins in the area surrounding Mount Diablo in Contra Costa County and runs 180 miles south to an area north of Paso Robles. It's mostly open space and characterized by grasslands and oak woodlands. There's also a significant amount of riparian habitat and seasonal wetlands. Together, these habitats are home for several sensitive plant and animal species. And there are several protected areas for these species within the Diablo Range, but they are fragmented, and wildlife movement into and out of them is frequently limited as traditional migration corridors are blocked by roads and other urban development. Next slide, please. One of the most significant wildlife movement barriers is where State Route 152 crosses through the Pacheco Pass in eastern Santa Clara County. 4 lanes wide and serving to connect US 101 near Gilroy to Interstate 5 near Los Banos, it sees a steady stream of vehicles moving at high speeds 24 hours a day. Not surprisingly, this has made it very difficult for wildlife to migrate based on their habitat needs. That's why this area has been included on the CDFW's 2020 Wildlife Movement Barriers Priority List, putting them on the top priority barriers in California. The project site itself is where SR 152 crosses Pacheco Creek. The location is part of the Bay Area Critical Linkage Project's Diablo Range to Intercoast Linkage, and improving wildlife movement in the project area is also considered a high priority by the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Conservation Plan, the California Essential Habitat Connectivity Plan, and the initial draft of the Santa Clara County Regional Conservation Investment Strategy. Next slide, please. Recognizing the need for work here, CDFW funded the Wildlife Permeability and Hazards Across Highway 152 Pacheco Pass Wildlife Connectivity Study through its Local Assistance Grant Program. This study developed recommendations for wildlife connectivity enhancements and to improve highway safety. This project will fund implementation of 4 of these recommendations: riprap improvements at the Pacheco Creek Bridge, bank improvements, Pacheco Creek riparian habitat restoration, and installation of directional fencing. A 5th recommendation to install what are called critter crossing shells in a culvert near the Pacheco Bridge will not be funded by the WCB, but will be implemented as part of the cost share portion of this grant. Next slide, please. The Pacheco Creek Bridge is protected from damage during flood by the placement of large boulders called riprap around its support. You can see the riprap in both of these pictures taken underneath the Pacheco Bridge. The gaps between the rocks are large and deep, making it difficult to impossible to traverse for many of the animal species that use the area to pass under SR 152. As can be seen in the top photo, this is not a problem during times of normal flows when the lower portion of the creek bank is accessible to wildlife. But when the bridge becomes flooded and banks are not available for use, as can be seen in the lower photo, the riprap acts as a barrier to wildlife movement. Removal of the riprap was not possible, so the project will fill in the riprap rocks with a sandy substrate to create a surface wildlife can walk on. Next slide, please. Similar to the riprap, dense thickets of vegetation also cause the bank to be unavailable for wildlife to pass under the bridge during flooding. Hopefully you can see from this photo how floodwaters reach right up to the vegetation and create a wildlife movement barrier. So this project will remove dead trees, shrubs, and invasive vegetation along the banks in order to increase wildlife access to the higher slope areas of the creek bank. Next slide, please. The riparian habitat restoration component will plant 17 acres of sycamore alluvial woodland. The final placement of the new sycamores has not been finalized, but the picture on the right shows a likely arrangement. The new plant area is a lighter shade of pink and will be implemented in a way that will maximize the stand of existing sycamores shown by the darker shaded area. When completed, this will create a visual screen for wildlife species that are sensitive to human presence and will direct wildlife away from SR 152. Next slide, please. The final component of the project will be to install 1.5 miles of directional fencing alongside SR 152. The fence will span the area between the Pacheco Creek culvert with the critter crossing shelving unit to beyond the Pacheco Creek Bridge. This fence will guide wildlife to the bridge and culvert and will keep them off the highway, reducing wildlife mortality and improving vehicle safety. Next slide, please. In trying to assess the benefits of this project, I think it's useful to look back at the pre-project monitoring that was part of the wildlife connectivity study. There were 3,125 attempted and successful animal crossings in the project area over the course of 12 months. The species documented include mountain lion, deer, badger, coyote, bobcat, gray fox, raccoon, striped skunk, and possum. And you can see many of them in these trail cam photos that were taken in the project area. And while there were many successful crossings, roadkill surveys in the project area have documented several individuals from the same group of species who were not successful. These surveys also revealed an increase in wildlife mortality when the bridges and culvert were flooded. So while this project will not completely solve the problem of wildlife movement barriers from the Pacheco Pass, it will increase the efficiency and safety of a critical wildlife migration corridor. Therefore, staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board approve this project as proposed. In the audience is Will Spangler from the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Agency and Tanya Diamond from Pathways for Wildlife. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Don. Any board member comments or questions? All right, hearing none, seeing no hands raised. Any members of the public wishing to speak? All right, seeing no hands raised there, we'll move on to item number 41 in the agenda. This is a project along the San Joaquin River Parkway in Fresno and Madera counties. This is to consider a grant to U.S. Green Building Council, Central California, for a cooperative project with the San Joaquin River Conservancy and the Wildlife Conservation Board, and Kara Allen on our staff will present the project this morning. Kara.
Thank you, John. Agenda item 41 is a proposal to consider a grant to the U.S. Green Building Council, Central California, for a public access planning project in Madera County, about 1 mile north of the city of Fresno. The project is within the San Joaquin River Parkway on land owned and managed by the San Joaquin River Conservancy and is downstream from 2 units of the San Joaquin River Ecological Reserve and is also very close to several other open space parcels that are owned by the Conservancy. Next slide. The project site is known as the Circle V property and was acquired in 2017 with help from WCB for the protection of riparian and woodland habitat and public access opportunities within the parkway. It's approximately 20 acres in size and consists of a 13-acre home site outlined in red that includes an unirrigated pasture, a hobby orchard, and 2 unoccupied residences. Outlined in yellow is the lower 7 acres that consists of mature riparian forest and oak woodland habitat on the floodplain of the San Joaquin River. Next slide. The purpose of this planning project is to develop a public access plan that will guide future use and construction of the property as an Indigenous and Environmental Resources Center. The project will use guidelines from the green building industry and connect professionals that work on different aspects of green building design, construction, and operation. The environmental values of the site will be protected by finding ways to work with nature and promoting site sustainability. This image gives you a better perspective of the bluff that separates the upper 13 acres from the lower 7 acres, and how the site can provide opportunities for an environmental learning center up top and a place to gather and appreciate nature down by the river. Next slide. The project scope of work includes 4 main planning tasks, including inventory and analysis of site conditions, community outreach and engagement, designs for both upper and lower portions of the property, and environmental review. Next slide. The U.S. Green Building Council will be working with 2 regional collaborators on this project and include the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival and the Lyles College of Engineering at Fresno State. The Advocates will be an important partner in the outreach and community engagement and sharing ideas on how to use this site as an Indigenous and Environmental Resources Center. Fresno State, through its Student Service Learning Program, will be engaging students in the departments of Engineering, Construction Management, Interactive Multimedia, and Business to help understand site conditions and develop design alternatives, concepts for low impact development, and a business plan for the site. Next slide. The project will include several stakeholder and community meetings, as well as site tours that promote inclusion of the local history, culture, and knowledge, and foster collaboration on a vision for this property. Site surveys, analysis, and reporting will be used in developing design plans and completing environmental review. A main goal of this project is to adaptively reuse the existing structures on site, and the Lyles College of Engineering will assist with architectural and civil engineering construction documents for these buildings and the pathways and public use areas surrounding them. 65% designs will be prepared for the buildings and adjoining campus, and 15% conceptual designs will be prepared for the lower 7 acres. Students in the MBA program will prepare a business plan that focuses on the management and programming of the Design Resources Center and the long-term management of the entire property. A visioning document will also be prepared that includes the design and engineering documents, graphics, and a narrative that communicates the vision, community input, and necessary steps to move the project to construction. Next slide. The project advances many aspects of the San Joaquin River Parkway Master Plan, but what this project really stands for and promotes for the Parkway and greater region are communication and engagement with local tribes, providing access to cultural and natural resources, and advancing educational values. And here with us today in support of the project are John Shelton and his staff at the San Joaquin River Conservancy, Laura Gromies, Executive Director at the U.S. Green Building Council, Central California, Carly Tex with the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival, Faribors Tarani, and Laura Husinga with Fresno State. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kara. And just for the record, we have received letters of support from Patricia Taylor, the Executive Director of the Madera County Transportation Commission, Ms. Sharon Weaver, Executive Director of the San Joaquin River Parkway and Conservation Trust, and Mr. Dirk Charlie, Tribal Liaison with the Dunlap Band of Mono Indians. Is there any board member questions at this time? Comments? All right, seeing none, is there any members from the public wishing to speak? I do see one hand raised. John Shelton.
Yeah, I know you guys are in a hurry because you've got a lot still on your plate to go through. But first off, I did want to very much give my appreciation to John's staff. We just had a couple of retirements from our usual people working on the project. So Kara and Alexa have both stepped up and really done a good job on bringing this. I wanted to make a comment about this project that we're very excited about it because it's our first real good access to working with the tribal groups in the area. Carly Text and her organization, I think, have a real good feeling, not just for our local tribes and tribal members, but also on a statewide basis. And the other thing I think is really important is our connection to Fresno State. This will be a learning project, so it's more than just planning. We're going to get Fresno State students in here learning and doing things. It will be a demonstration all around. So we're very excited about this process. And we did want to go out with concepts and let both the tribal folks and the students have a good shot at figuring out what we want to do into the future here. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, John. Is there any more comments from the public? Okay, seeing none. We'll move on to item number 42. This is also along the San Joaquin River and a cooperative project with the San Joaquin River Conservancy to acquire 23 acres in Fresno, on the Fresno County side of the river. Daniel Esquez will provide you the presentation. Daniel.
Thank you, John. This proposal is to consider the acquisition of 21 acres of land by CDFW and a transfer of jurisdiction of land by CDFW to the San Joaquin River Conservancy for the protection of riparian habitat and to provide future wildlife-oriented public use opportunities within the San Joaquin River Parkway. The property is located directly south of North Lanes Road and west of Rice Road, with frontage along the east side of the San Joaquin River and is within the Fresno city limits. The Conservancy's Genco property is on the southern border. The Conservancy also owns multiple properties located along both sides of the San Joaquin River near the property. These properties include Jensen River Ranch, Van Buren Unit, and River West. Next slide, please. The property is accessed by a driveway off of North Lanes Road. The topography is undulating with areas of embankment and sloping terrain along the river. Surrounding property uses consist of agriculture, rural residential, a recycling center, and sand and gravel extraction. Next slide, please. The property is comprised of 40 APNs totaling approximately 21 acres. 3 of the parcels are improved with a single family home and an attached carport and converted garage, detached shop, and garden shed. The 4-car garage has been converted into 2 separate apartments. The first is a 1-bedroom apartment unit, and the second one is a studio apartment. The Conservancy plans to convert the home into its office headquarters. The California High-Speed Rail Authority expressed interest in acquiring a portion of the property to fulfill mitigation requirements. If this acquisition is approved and CDFW finds that the portion of property meets high-speed rail's mitigation requirements, high-speed rail would place funds into escrow on the per acre value determined by DGS's approved appraisal. Next slide, please. The property is in the planning area for the San Joaquin River Parkway, a natural and recreational area in the San Joaquin River floodplain that begins at Friant Dam and extends roughly 22 miles along the San Joaquin River to State Route 99. The parkway includes portions of Madera and Fresno counties and the city of Fresno. And the planning area varies in width from a narrow wildlife corridor where the river bluffs are steep and close to the river to extensive floodplains of several hundred acres. Next slide, please. Following the acquisition, the Conservancy will manage the property as an addition to existing parkway properties. The main purpose of this acquisition is to retain the majority of the site in its natural state, develop portions of the property for general public access, and convert the home to the Conservancy's office headquarters. Next slide, please. A successful acquisition of this property would include continuous trail connections from the Conservancy's Jensen River Ranch and Genco properties to the adjacent Lewis S. Eaton Trail. The acquisition of this property was approved by the San Joaquin River Conservancy Board in October. Staff recommends approval of this property as proposed, this project as proposed. If you have specific questions, John Sheldon, representing the San Joaquin River Conservancy, and Crystal Tomlinson, representing CDFW, are available. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Any board member comments or questions? All right, seeing none, hearing none. Any members of the public? Great, seeing no hands raised, we'll move on to item number 43, the Western Riverside MSHCP Woods Canyon project. This is to consider a grant to the Western Riverside County Resource Conservation Authority to acquire about 62 acres in Riverside County. Also to accept and then subgrant federal Section 6 grant for the acquisition. Sadie Smith on our staff will present the project. Sadie.
Thank you, John. So the property is located in the western portion of the city of Hemet in the San Jacinto Valley at the base of the San Jacinto Mountains and Santa Rosa Hills in Riverside County. The geographical area encompasses most of the San Jacinto River floodplain and the associated low-lying alluvial plains along the foothills of the Lakeview Mountains to the northwest. The area is relatively flat, alluvial plain at about 1,450 feet in elevation, with several canyons draining from the higher mountains to the east. Next slide, please. The property is within the Western Riverside County MSHCP, a comprehensive multi-jurisdictional habitat conservation plan. The property supports very rare alkali vernal pool habitat that is inhabited by rare plants, including San Jacinto Valley crown scale, Davidson's salt scale, vernal barley, Holtier's goldfields, little mousetail, and smooth tar plant, along with common fairy shrimp. The property is an important part of the Hemet vernal pool complex that is to be conserved in perpetuity under the MSHCP. Very few parcels under existing MSHCP conservation support the San Jacinto Valley crown scale and Davidson salt scale. Next slide, please. The RCA owns and manages several hundred acres of property in the immediate vicinity, including 2 prior WCB projects, the Caitlan property acquisition in 2015 and the Western Riverside County MSHCP Expansion 5 acquisition in 2011. In addition to providing a connection to conserved lands owned by the RCA, on a regional basis, the property will provide linkages to various reserves across the broader landscape, including CDFW San Jacinto Wildlife Area, Lake Paris State Park further to the north, and Diamond Valley Lake Reserve located to the south. Next slide, please. The RCA will manage the property as part of the Western Riverside County MSHCP Reserve System, which serves to provide permanent habitat protection for populations of federal and state listed endangered and threatened species that occupy the reserve, and to increase regional wildlife habitat cores and linkages that will connect existing habitat reserve areas throughout Western Riverside County. The RCA retains reserve manager to ensure that management actions are consistent with the plan. DGS has approved a fair market value of $7,730,000. Staff recommends that the WCB approve this project as proposed. Hector Casillas and Tricia Campbell with the RCA are in the audience to help address any questions. Back to you, John.
Thank you, Sadie. We did receive one letter of support for this project from Mr. Dan Silver, Executive Director of the Endangered Habitats League. And is there any board member comments or questions? Sadie or myself? All right, seeing none, hearing none. Any members of the public wishing to speak? All right, thank you, Sadie. We'll move on to item number 44, the Blue Diamond acquisition. This is a project to consider a grant to the city of Sacramento. This project was evaluated and brought to us by the Lower American River Advisory Committee, which is a function of the Wildlife Conservation Board. Mr. John Walsh on our staff will present the project. John.
Thanks, John. This project involves a grant to the city of Sacramento to facilitate the Blue Diamond acquisition. The property is located within the city limits along the American River in an area known as Sutter's Landing. The property is located adjacent to the American River Parkway. Projects presented to WCB are first vetted through the Lower American River Conservancy Program and its advisory committee, which was created in 2016. This project is the first acquisition recommended in this program. Next slide, please. The acquisition consists of 19 acres. The primary purpose for the acquisition is to enable the city to protect vital habitat and provide public access to the property in a section of the American River that is currently not reachable from land. The acquisition increases access to the American River for anglers, hikers, bicyclists, and other visitors, including residents of significantly disadvantaged communities. In addition, the property provides habitat for wildlife, including Swainson's hawk, white-tailed kite, northern harrier, Cooper's hawk, coyote, and many other species. Next slide, please. Portions of the property were previously used as a landfill containing inert construction material. If the acquisition is approved today, then the landowner will be remediating the contamination associated with the landfill before closing escrow with the city. The landowner is currently working with the County of Sacramento Environmental Management Department for approval of a landfill closure plan. The property owner will be required to complete the site remediation to satisfaction of the city and WCB and provide closure confirmation from the applicable regulatory agencies prior to the city taking title to the property. This is expected to occur sometime in 2022. The project is being presented today to give some assurance to the landowner that WCB is committing to funding the project. Next slide, please. The property is located within the Sutter's Landing area, and the acquisition will allow the city to expand upon the Sutter's Landing Regional Park. Property will allow for future extension of the Two Rivers Trail system through Sutter's Landing, include passive recreation and access to nature areas for park users, and will be an expansion of open space and habitat areas within Sutter's Landing. The city will fund ongoing maintenance of the land through its park maintenance fund. Staff recommends approval as proposed. In the audience is Richard Sanders with the City of Sacramento, John Febo, Planning Superintendent for the Recycling and Solid Waste Division of the City of Sacramento.
Great, thank you, John. Is there any board member comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, I do see two hands raised. First, Mr. Jeff Harris, who's the council member with the City of Sacramento, but then also the chairman of the Lower American River Advisory Committee. So Jeff.
Thank you, John. I'd just like to say to the board that this is a really unique opportunity to expand a regional park in an urban setting. Gathering 17 plus acres, in the city of Sacramento is a really unique opportunity to increase access to the American River. And this is a particularly beautiful stretch of river. Great habitat opportunity as well, as John mentioned. We've been working on this project for over 2 years, and I'd like to thank our city staff members, John Febo and Rich Sanders, for doing a pretty complicated negotiation with Blue Diamond to acquire this property. So there are a lot of benefits here. We get to close and remediate a landfill property, create access and recreation opportunities. I'd like to thank Assembly Member McCarty as well, because our conservancy program is very new. It's just a couple of years old, and it was legislation carried by McCarty that made this happen, and also the efforts of Corey Brown and myself to create the conservancy program. I'd like to thank John Donnelly, your director, Kara Allen and Mary Ahern for shepherding our successes so far and taking good care of the program. I encourage you to vote for this. Additionally, there's another benefit here. If we can acquire this property, the adjacent property that you see in this slide, just to the west, is owned by SMUD. They will also be remediating that property and deeding it to the city of Sacramento. So we'll have a combined 30 acres additional to Sutter's Landing Regional Park. It creates almost a mile of river access right in the heart of the city. Understand that this is only 5 minutes from downtown, from City Hall. So the access is tremendous. It's a great project, and I appreciate your consideration. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jeff. Corey Brown.
Very good. Thank you, John. Thank you, members of the WCB board. I also support the Blue Diamond acquisition. I'm a vice chair of your Lower American River Conservancy Advisory Committee. My personal capacity today, as Jeff indicated, this is a really rare opportunity in the middle of one of the largest cities in the Central Valley to connect people to nature. It's a great project. Wanted to thank John, Kara, John Walsh, Mary Ahern for all their work on the Conservancy. Urge you to support it. When you're close to Sutter's Landing, it's only a short drive away from the Capitol. Highly recommend touring the site. It's quite an urban, natural oasis in the middle of an urban complex.
Great, thank you, Corey. Any other members of the public? Okay, seeing none, is there any additional board member comments or questions or any comments at this time? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 45 in the agenda. It's the last presentation project. This is to consider a grant to the Trust for Public Land for a project down along the Ventura River in Southern California and Ventura County. Don Walsh will also present you the project this morning. This afternoon.
This project involves a grant to the Trust for Public Land to facilitate the Ventura River Parkway acquisition. The property will be direct deeded to Ventura Land Trust, who will be the long-term holder of the property. The property is located along the Ventura River on the west side of North Ventura Avenue near the intersection of Ventura Avenue and Cañada Larga Road. Next slide, please. The property is within a high priority area of CDFW's Ventura Watershed Conceptual Area Protection Plan, or CAP. The goals of the CAP are to provide sustainable habitat connectivity, protection for Ventura Watershed's 138 sensitive status species, and provide compatible public access where suitable. The CAP also seeks floodplain protection, including the confluence of the Ventura River and Cañada Larga Creek. Next slide, please. The Ventura River watershed is a stream network that remains largely unchannelized. 2 dams, 3 levees, and high rates of runoff from urban areas have modified the stream shape. Ventura Land Trust plans to implement future restoration and enhancement activities, which could include a seasonal drainage way to capture overflow from flooding Cañada Larga Creek. The goal is to have Cañada Larga Creek and the Ventura River to function as a floodplain while diverting floodwaters away from downstream developed properties. This would also create a substantial benefit for drought relief through groundwater recharge. Next slide, please. The property contains critical habitat for the Southern California steelhead, California red-legged frog, Southwestern willow flycatcher, California condor, leaf-spells vireo, and tidewater goby. 7 acres of the property is subject to an existing lease for a county permitted contractor storage yard. This lease will continue for up to 20 years and is helping to leverage funding for this acquisition. The lease will terminate after 20 years. Next slide, please. In 2010, the Trust for Public Land, Ventura Land Trust, and the State Coastal Conservancy provided a vision plan for the Lower Ventura River Parkway. The goal of the plan is to reconnect people with the Lower Ventura River by providing opportunities for recreation, education, and stewardship while protecting the natural resources. Next slide, please. The property is bisected by an existing quarter-mile stretch of the Ventura River Trail, a 6.2-mile long multi-use trail. This trail links up with additional trails to create nearly 20 miles of multi-use trails from the Pacific Ocean along the Ventura River to downtown Ojai. Ventura Land Trust plans are for a construction of a trailhead on the property to reconnect visitors with the river. This is ideal because the property is situated adjacent to public transportation. Staff recommends the project approval as proposed. In the audience is Alex Size, Project Manager, the Trust for Public Land, Derek Poltney, Executive Director, Ventura Land Trust, and Brooke Ashworth, Senior Conservation Advisor for Ventura Land Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, John. For the record, we have received a letter of support from Mr. Steve Bennett, the Assembly Member with the 37th Assembly District, Ms. Linda Park, Supervisor, 2nd District, County of Ventura Board of Supervisors, and Mr. Dan Silver, Executive Director of the Endangered Habitats League. Is there any board member comments or questions on this particular item?
I have one quick comment, John, if I may.
Yeah, Fran, please.
Having represented LA and Ventura County for 14 years in the legislature, and I paid a lot of attention to the potential of this river. I want to let you know that the residents in Ventura County are absolutely thrilled with the support from the Wildlife Conservation Board and are strongly in favor. Everyone I've spoken to this grant to the Trust for Public Land. There's so much potential here. For those of you not familiar with the area, yes, environmental value, but mostly a lot of public access to downtown older sections of Ventura who are in roughly disadvantaged communities that will really enjoy this flood protection and groundwater recharge. This area of California is not tied into the state water project and relies on groundwater and water reuse projects. So this goes upstream for quite a few miles. And then another project that the Wildlife Conservation Board supported earlier this year was, or last year, was the removal of the planning of the removal of the Matilaha Dam. It is all connected, and this is going to make an amazing difference for people in Ventura County and Santa Barbara County, which is adjacent, for generations to come. So thank you on behalf of everyone down there.
Great, thank you, Fran. Is there any other board member comments, questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I see one public member, Alex Size. Your hand's raised.
Hey, John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, thank you. And thank you to the board members for your consideration. Not to take anything away from the other great projects on your agenda, but I appreciate you guys saving the best for last year. I just wanted to reiterate that, yes, back in 2008, 2010, Cal Poly Pomona put into place the vision plan for the lower Ventura River. This project helps implement that vision. And just want to say how appreciative I am of working with the Ventura Land Trust and helping to implement that vision. And wanted to say thank you to John Walsh. I very much appreciate his diligent work on this. And it's a pleasure to get his advice, his direction on this one. Is pretty complicated project due to the industrial zoning there. So just want to say thank you, John, to your good work. And again, thank you for the board's consideration of this agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Is there any more public comment? All right, seeing none. Is there any more board questions or comments on any of the presentation items? That project is the last one in our agenda. So I would just like to make another call for questions or comments on any of the projects. Seeing none. So Mr. Chair, I think we're ready to go for a motion on the presentation calendar, which would include items 32 through 45.
Let's do it.
All right, so what I'll do is I'll read the motion and I'll ask for somebody to move that motion and get a second, and then we'll take a roll call vote. So staff recommends that the Wildlife Conservation Board adopt the written findings and approve individual projects numbered 32 through 45, inclusive of the recommended funding sources and amounts as identified in the Wildlife Conservation Board final meeting agenda dated February 25th, 2021. Authorize staff to enter into appropriate agreements necessary to accomplish these projects, and authorize staff and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to proceed substantially as planned. Do I have a motion or movement?
I would be glad to move the motion as articulated by the Director Donnelly for items 32 through 45.
Thank you, Fran. Get a second?
I'll second.
All right, Mary. Thank you, Mary. So with that, Chuck Bonham?
Yes.
Diane Colborn?
Yes.
Mary Kreisman?
Yes.
Richard Gillian?
Yes.
Fran Pavley?
Yes.
Pete Silva?
Yes.
Yes, motion passes, Mr. Chair. So that concludes our meeting for today. Is there any other comments that any of the board members want to make or have anything of interest that you want to impart?
Just thanks to the staff and everyone for all your hard work on this great meeting.
Thank you, Diane. All right. Hearing none. Chuck, do you want to adjourn the meeting?
Yes, everyone stay
healthy and safe. Enjoy your day, as the slide says, and we're adjourned. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.